Welcome back, everyone, to the next episode of Things That Bug Me. Today I have with me my good friend Mike, who is Jay's wife. Jay did an episode a couple of episodes ago on
Husband.
cars.
I'm Jay's husband.
Sorry, did I say wife? I do apologize. Yeah, Jay's husband. Jay obviously is Mike's wife. Yes, so sorry about that. And yeah, so Mike is going to complain today about packaging, I believe, is your gripe. Is that right, Mike? So thanks very much for coming on. Pleasure to have you here. I'm just going to sit back and listen to you for the first few minutes as you explain what your gripe is, and then I'll jump in with some questions, and we'll develop a conversation around it. So yeah, again, thank you very much for coming. Lovely to have you here, and away you go.
Okay, so when, like I said before, yeah, we bought this packet of fish, and it was a frozen kind of fish, and we bought it before, and it's kind of a treat. It's a kind of luxury type thing. And then I opened the pack, and the two pieces of fish were about half the size they used to be, but the pack was the same size. So you have all this cardboard packaging. Half of it was complete waste. Inside the cardboard packaging, there's also a plastic inner packaging. That's also waste. And both myself and Jay are in the Chinese astrology, we're rats, and rats hate to be ripped off. Like it's like the kind of core bug me thing is getting ripped off.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a wider scale, in terms of regulation and governance in this kind of stuff, how all of the regulation and carbon taxes, this kind of stuff, even as we move into social credit scores and this kind of stuff, and how much we're using, we're the ones who are penalized. So like it's like the entire system is focusing on putting all the pressure, all the weight on us, while corporate companies, these kind of things get to deceive us in terms of the packaging. Be extreme, like if you think that half of all the packaging is waste from the get-go, that's what really bugs me. It's kind of the energy used in the production of this waste is waste also. So that you have this compounding waste of resources at a time when the governments and this kind of even the companies are talking about us reducing our waste, reducing our energy consumption, and being more ecological in how we live, how we consume, while they can continue to present us with these products that are fundamentally ripping us off. And the hypocrisy in it, I think, is what really gets to me.
So there's a few things that have come up there. Firstly, this notion of shrinkflation. I mean, this is not a new thing, right? I mean, I've noticed, particularly since COVID, during and since COVID, that pouches of cat food that used to be 100-gram pouches, now they're 85-gram pouches. They look exactly the same, but you've lost 15% of the content, and the cost of the packet is the same, or even a little bit higher. And this has happened in loads of things. Packs of crisps that used to be 150 grams are now 130 grams. You know, this kind of thing. There's the same size bag with less in it. So yeah, two things. Firstly, like the packaging hasn't shrunk to accommodate the contents, and the deception that goes on in there. Look, it's the same product, right? But no, it's not. It's less of the same product. And so yeah, that's the ripping off is based on deception, isn't it? You think you're going to get something, but you actually get less than what you thought you were going to get, and so you've been deceived in that process. And then the packaging, oh wow, look, that's a generous portion. Oh no, it isn't, right? Like that kind of that disappointment.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned like social credit scores and carbon taxes and things like that. And why, like, you didn't choose to put all that packaging around those pieces of fish, right? So why should you be saddled with the burden of being charged for it, if you like, right? You're going to get, oh well, you've used all that packaging, right? And so that goes on your score. It doesn't go on the manufacturer's score. Yeah, that is totally unfair. And then the other thing is, like, there's three parts to this excessive packaging, right? One, there's the extra materials involved in making the packaging. Then there's the extra lorry space, train space, whatever, in transporting those extra large packaging, right? You need more lorries to transport the same amount of fish because the packages are bigger, right? And then thirdly, the disposal of the waste from that packaging. And so all three of those are larger than they need to be because of this excessive packaging.
And I would add a fourth, like when you're hungry and you think you've got a nice big dinner coming and you get this little child-sized portion. There's that bit too in there as well. But that waste of energy, it's really hard for me to accept that things are the way they are being presented to us in terms of energy usage and conservation and this kind of like the whole ecological, because of like there's so much waste and yeah, there's just so much waste in the entire process.
So easy to reduce so much of that, right? Like, it would be so easy if there was actually a will to do it.
Yeah.
And so things can't be that bad, or there would be the will to do it, right? Yeah.
Exactly that stuff. Yeah.
So where else do you see this, not necessarily in packaging, but like this deceptive practice of making it look as though you're getting more than you are?
The other thing that came to mind for me was around the Nord Stream pipeline, as the biggest environmental, like the biggest release of carbon into the atmosphere of the last 3 to 4 decades, and the motivation behind that. And like for me, the notion that the Russians did it to themselves is kind of an insult to my intelligence. So regardless of who, not going into that, but just that whole narrative of being ecological, the climate crisis, this kind of stuff, when those who are driving that entire narrative are it's like one rule for us and another rule for them.
Yeah, I mean, Nord Stream was methane, right? It wasn't even CO2; it was methane, which is whatever 100 times more powerful greenhouse gas than. Yeah, it doesn't jive. We must produce less carbon, and yet in order to, and it's that, like, we don't know any of this for certain, right? But from what I understand, it seems likely that the US carried that act of sabotage out in order to prevent Russian gas from getting to, well, Northern Europe, Germany in particular, so that the US could sell them oil and gas instead, right? Because the US is now a net exporter of fossil fuels. With all the fracking they've been doing over the last decade or two, they are now net exporters. And so it is a purely economic move, it looks like, right? We'll destroy this pipeline so that we can sell our gas and oil to Germany, all of which is producing more gas and oil because now it has to be transported by tanker from the US instead of by pipeline from Russia. So the whole thing is just adding a whole bunch more consumption of fossil fuels to the equation. So clearly the motivation is not really reducing emissions. That is a smokescreen to manipulate and control our behavior, seems like.
And to tax that behavior.
Absolutely.
Like the profit motive just seems to be the driving force at all levels. It's kind of, so all the solutions are to tax the population or the consumers, but there's actually no will to accomplish what is like there's a deceit in there as well in terms of these carbon taxes and that kind of stuff. It's actually just increasing revenue and taxation, this kind of stuff. And while that's happening, the actual thing that needs attending to isn't being attended to.
Yeah.
So again, it's that kind of, because I feel like the thing needs attending to. And you know, it's I tend to see money as energy and the energy to accomplish things. And so if we want to accomplish anything in terms of the amount of waste and the environmental crisis that's arising as a consequence, the ones who say they're doing it aren't, they're making it worse. And they're taking the energy from us to do anything about it because they're claiming that they're doing something about it. But this whole the for me, as obviously I'm Irish, and the Catholic Church here, and this thing of the common people being the problem. We are over consuming. Like when we had the banking crisis here, it's kind of like, I remember the prime minister at the time saying we all went a bit crazy, as if we all went a bit crazy, and it wasn't just the bankers and the politicians and the builders, this kind of stuff. So it's always this offloading of responsibility onto this kind of amorphous commons. So yeah, that kind of avoiding responsibility and then not attending to what need, like in taking responsibility, something gets done about what needs getting done. And this kind of constant stepping out from under the authority, the mandate that's given through democracy to these various groups that say they're going to do something about it.
It strikes me that it's part of the much larger story that, you know, people like Daniel, for example, Daniel Schmachtenberger, have been telling for a while. You know, that essentially modern commerce, modern capitalism is the process of enclosing sections of the commons, taking the commons, enclosing them, making them private, charging people rent to use that which was previously commons, and then dumping the costs of doing that business onto the remainder of the commons, right? Like they're externalizing as many of the costs of doing business as they possibly can to the remainder of the commons. And so bit by bit by bit, enclosing the commons, making them private, and dumping their waste essentially into what remains, making it more and more, defiling it more and more, therefore making it cheaper and cheaper to enclose the next bit, that kind of thing. And that process, so essentially there is the end goal is that there is nothing left which is common. All is privately owned and rent sought, and the end user is also responsible for all of the damage, right? They have it dumped upon them, and yet are also scapegoated for it. That kind of thing, right?
Yeah. And then I came across this thing. Someone said recently, the state produces nothing.
Yeah.
And consequently, the state can give nothing. And that end goal is pretty fucking close. Like when I look at the banking crisis here in Ireland and the process then that of privatizing what used to be like the telephones, the telephone network used to be state owned, the water used to be state owned, all these things used to be state owned, and all that infrastructure, all those businesses were created by the generations that had preceded this one. And at some point, it stopped belonging to the people and started belonging to somebody else. And it's all set up by these various different crises. Um, and that process has continued for
Mm.
almost 20 years now. And we're at that point where we're certainly here, like that last referendum in Ireland where like almost 80% said no, just no, no, no.
Yeah.
And so we are definitely at that cusp where we have local elections in 2 weeks' time and a general election in 6 months. And it's interesting to see. There's a kind of excitement in seeing what's going to happen next.
Mm.
Um, but there are so few options at the same time. Like every single part of the political establishment said yes to that referendum. And then 80% of the population said no. So it's a really interesting
Mm.
time politically here.
Oh, there's a very similar situation in the US where, I mean, I don't know, I'm picking numbers out of thin air, but 80% say of the population don't really want either Trump or Biden, and yet what else have they got?
They're not
Like
going to.
everything else is being portrayed as crazy fringe. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, the thing you brought up about the privatization of previously publicly owned utilities, the water, the
Mm.
electricity grid, the transportation networks, the energy companies, all of this kind of thing. Yeah, it's been 20, 30. I mean, Thatcher started this process in the UK
Mm.
anyway, back in the early 80s, right? She started the
Mm.
process of selling off British Gas and the water companies and so on. And it generated a ton of revenue for the government at the time. And so they were able to increase public spending, and everyone thought, oh, this is great, this is great. But actually, like the fundamental thing of, well, two fundamental things. Firstly, it's theft. Like on its face, it's theft, right? Because those utilities were built with public money and then given away to private interests in order to rent seek from them, right? Like once it's in private hands, they now are actually interested in paying dividends to their shareholders, generating as much profit as possible, cutting as many corners as possible, neglecting the infrastructure as much as they can get away with in order to maximize the dividends that they pay to their shareholders, instead of that money staying in the public. And by being state owned, I mean, by saying that it's state owned, what we're actually saying is that it's commons. That's what we actually mean, because the
Yes.
state is,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it should be, but the state
Mm-hmm.
is the people, and so state owned actually means commons, and then it's been taken out of commons and put into private hands. Prices have gone up, and those increased prices have gone to line the pockets of shareholders, not all of whom are rich people. I mean, a lot of the shareholders are things like pension funds, right? And lots of us have money in pension funds and so on. But
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel right to me that our pensions should be linked to overcharging people for gas and electric and water and use of the public transportation networks, right? Like this is not what should be financing our pension funds. This is not how it should be.
Mm. And
So
this is
yeah, it's
like,
theft. It's theft, taking it out of public hands when the public has paid for it, giving it away so that the public can be charged more for a thing that they paid for in the first place, right? Like it's
Mhm.
pretty outrageous when you look
And
at it like that.
like I'm working class, so I not only did we pay for it, but we built it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like this is and that kind of circle of keeping people in jobs, maintaining these things that are. But I remember the first time I started thinking about this, like if things were the way they were supposed to be, then surely once these things are built, what they produce should be um free is probably a bit naive, but like the maintenance, all this kind of stuff needs to be, but like
Yeah.
why,
But
yeah,
at
like
cost, though, not free, but at
at
cost. Yeah,
cost,
yeah,
exactly, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So like I did very much see it from that perspective. Like when I was growing up, my mates' fathers worked in these, like there's electricians in my family. There's that work at the power plants and this kind of stuff. all those people, like that was the way I saw it. We are the ones who built these things.
Hmm.
We are the ones who maintain these things. And then you have this government structure that has stolen it, said it had a mandate to do it. And like we had the Celtic Tiger here as well. And that was all bankers with just the stuff that went on here. We had when the banks collapsed here, it was one specific bank, but we ended up with 48,000 euros debt for every man, woman, and child in the country. And everybody else got bailed out. There was nobody, there was no arrest, nobody took responsibility, no nothing. And then, like I remember going into a bank prior to that, and somebody behind the counter would see that there was a customer there and come to the cashier's window because they served the
Mm.
customer. Now you go into a bank and you've got the option of four machines, and one person who will make you stand there for 10 minutes before they can be asked to come to a window. So it's kind of like it's that kind of
Yeah, we're doing
switcheroo,
you a
you know?
favor as opposed to we're here to serve you. We're doing you a favor is what it's turned into. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like for me, it was kind of like uh, that whole banking crisis revealed all the criminality in the banking system, and then they started treating us like
Mm.
criminals. You know, it's kind of all these extra rules, all these extra charges for maintaining accounts and this kind of stuff. Like it's really, yeah, and it really all goes back to that thing. I feel like we're getting we're being slipped a Mickey, as we would say here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's been going on for a while. This complete turning around of public service now becoming authority over, right? Like this has been the move that I've noticed is that people
Yeah.
who were elected to public office in order to serve the interests of the public now think of themselves as rulers over, right? Authority figures who can tell people what to do based on their own
Mm.
whims, right? Like got nothing to do with expressing the will of the people at all anymore.
Mm. Mm. Like I remember growing up, the bin lorry would come around and take away the bins. There was no charges. That was a public service. Like, and we have slowly gotten to the point where to the option of not being a wage slave, like there's a shift towards slavery, is what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of we are enslaved to like just to live, to survive. You
Monthly
need to pay all
payments.
these rates and all this kind of stuff, and it's kind of um,
Yeah, I see the monthly payment, the monthly direct debit, right? Like that is the most insidious yet powerful mechanism of slavery ever
yeah,
invented. What can you do,
mm,
right? What can you do? You've
nothing.
got, there's whatever,
Yeah,
there's 18 direct debits going out of your account every month, and you've got to cover that shit. And
yeah. We had a mobile internet, and so we wanted to cancel the contract. Actually no, the contract was up, and we had completed the contract, and we were canceling the service, um, and we were informed that we had to give 30 days notice before we could cancel. And then, so we gave the 30 days notice, and then they still took the next payment. And then they said, so I don't know how it works, but they returned 20% of the payment that they took and said that we owed the rest. So they made us pay an extra month because we had to give 30 days notice to cancel. Now, if we didn't pay our bill, we'd be cut off the next day.
mm,
Yeah, the service cancelled, your bill is late,
mm,
this kind of stuff. So just this constant, um, just mafia like
mm,
extortion. Um, I saw a thing the other day. It was a TED talk, And this guy was saying that it's now easier to be a billionaire in the US than it is a millionaire. Isn't that crazy? Like that we've
What do you mean
gotten
by
like
easier?
that.
I don't understand. I don't understand what you mean by easier.
It's easier to become a billionaire in America now than a millionaire. There's so much pressure on millionaires. It's harder to maintain your million than
Oh,
it
I
is to
see.
maintain your billions.
Because a billionaire will come up and gobble you.
Yeah, something like that, man.
Mm.
Yeah.
All right, so we've sort not exactly, but we've kind of drifted from the original thing of packaging into a sort of larger discussion of um, manipulation, deception, powerlessness, right? This kind of thing, like being dictated to and having no choice but to go along with those diktats. So if we can try and sort of come back to the original thing of
Yeah.
packaging, and I think we've kind of like what actually bugs you about this is the rip off, right? Like the deception, the appearance of generosity when actually it's stinginess, in part, and then the wastefulness is the other part of that, right? But it feels like the emotional hook is actually the fucking
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well,
It's the
it's exactly the same thing. You don't know what's in the box, and so because for me, there's no difference
mm,
between the two things. What they're saying is in the box isn't what's in the box.
yeah. So they're
Even at the
creating
level
an
of government.
expectation. They're creating an expectation, right? By giving you this nice big box and then totally failing to meet that expectation when you actually open up the box.
Mm.
Yeah.
This is what I mean. Like if you imagine the government is presenting itself in this way when you open the box, actually, so
No,
it's the same thing. It's exactly
no,
the same.
totally. I get that. Yeah, no, I get that. I
And and
absolutely see the parallel.
and the resources we have, like the let's say the thing that's presented in the packaging, the resources we have to actually go and get that for ourselves are being taken
Mm.
away, and that kind of it feels like the sand in an hourglass. It's kind of like we're getting close to the end of that, and it's going to be time to flip that stuff over. Um, that's
Yeah,
what it feels like.
there used to be back in the day. There used to be these things called jubilees, and so when the sand ran out of the hourglass and it was time to start, you just reset
Yeah.
everything, right? Like everything went back to zero. All debts were cleared.
Mm.
Huge amalgamations of wealth were redistributed. This kind of thing, and this was expected, right? Whatever it was, 100 years, 50 years, whatever it was, there would be a jubilee and a big celebration, and because they understood that you can't play Monopoly forever, right? One person ends up with all the
Mhm.
property and all the money, and then it's no fucking fun for anyone else after that point, right? It's not actually any
Mhm.
fun for the person that has all the money and all the property either. Not really.
Mm.
And so, the ability to put the game back in the box and start again periodically is really essential if we're
Yeah.
to enjoy the game. But yeah, no, this
Uh,
this thing of failing, this thing of not just failing to meet expectations, but deliberately creating high expectations
mhm.
in the full
Mhm.
knowledge that you're not going to be meeting them, right? Like it's profoundly, profoundly deceptive. And I have to say, I blame us as consumers and voters and whatever for allowing it, right? Like we continue
Yeah.
to go to the polls every year and vote for people we fucking hate. Like the lesser of
Mhm.
an evil is what we'll go and vote for at the polls rather than
Mhm. Mhm.
demanding something better, right? Refusing to go along with it and demanding something better. Same thing with the packaging, right? Like, how many people send that back going, fuck off, I'm not paying for that. This is bullshit. I'm
Mhm.
not paying. If enough people
Mhm.
started doing this, it would have no choice but to change. So
Like for
I do
me,
feel like we bear a lot of the responsibility for having allowed thing. And I know it's bit by bit by bit, right? It's death by 1,000 cuts, all that kind of thing. And each little one doesn't look so bad. And then all of a sudden, hang on, how did we get here? Is
yeah.
is is where we find ourselves.
That was the like you nailed it there in term that's precisely it. But it hadn't crossed my mind to just put that fish back in that box and bring it back to the shop and say, send that back to the producer. I refuse to pay for it. Give me my money back. I just decided what I'm not fucking buying that anymore. And I'm very conscious of boycott and the kind of purchasing power as a power and that kind of stuff. But I like that. I might actually go and buy another pack, literally, just to
just in
do
order to do
that.
that.
Like to start a movement like that, send it back.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, there's two things that occur to me. One is that, right? Like the consumer actually getting more aggressive with their no, sorry,
yeah,
this is not acceptable.
yeah,
This is not what you promised me. This is not what it looks like. Fuck off, I do not
mm,
accept it. That's one thing.
yeah,
And the other thing is, you know, for many goods, things like sugar and flour and cereals and dry cat food and dog food and this kind of stuff, I see absolutely no reason in the world why we shouldn't be able to take our own containers down to the shops with us, fill them up from a big vat, you know what I mean, weigh them at the counter like we
yeah.
do with fruit and veg, and pay for the weight that you take, right? Like, why not? Why not? I see absolutely no reason that couldn't be set up pretty easily, wouldn't cost a lot, would save a shit ton of packaging
Yeah,
and
yeah.
transportation costs.
And energy in the creation of that packaging, everything. It's kind of, I agree with you 100% on that one.
And you know, there's low
And
hanging fruit, like I
in
say,
that,
sugar and cat food. But as we get better at it, things like milk and you know,
yeah,
tomato sauce and stuff like that. This could
mm.
all come online with the you know, and the supermarket
And
would be a
then,
very different place, right? It'd just be this big rows and rows of huge vats of things with handles on. You go
that's
and
it.
pull and fill up your
Exactly.
containers, right?
Yeah, and they don't get to sell you fucking a dodgy package. Like that's precise, and that's why there's no will there for that. Which again, it goes back to that narrative that we're actually doing something about climate crisis and reducing energy consumption, and but we're not. We're just
No,
pretending to.
yeah,
And it's kind of we're being abused. And there was an element of that when, like, when I like, I was really triggered when I opened that pack. And that's there is that element of nobody fucking will do anything about this. Sorry about the language.
no, 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 please.
But that you can cut that out. But like, unless there's some kind of collective action from the market, instead of this kind of that's just the way it is,
Mm,
and just accepting it and kind of taking the hit. It's like actually respond to the hit.
yeah.
Um, Collectively and really start to push back. But I like that's where we're at. I think we're getting to that point. Um, but I hadn't considered that. Just put it back in the box. Yeah, I think the bigger picture of that kind of collective action and actually attending to what needs attending to, rather than the virtue signaling that's going on from these various different institutions and their this is the thing, say with the Nord Stream, it's kind of like they're telling us we have to do this thing while they're doing the opposite. Actually, they're not doing the opposite. They're doubling down, making it worse, rather than better. And that's exponential. Do you know, these things are out of control. I'm a father, so I consider what the world would be like for my children. And it's getting worse by the day. And
I
they're
remember what I
claiming
was
that
going to
it's
say. I remember what I was going to say before now. So the idea of actually kicking up a stink and you know they've made it increasingly difficult to do that. Like you try and get hold of a customer services department, you know, you get bounced around from extension to extension. Oh, this is not my department. It's not my job. No one's actually willing to take it like that. Bit by bit by bit, it has become more and more difficult to actually make that kind of statement. You know, Ira, because it doesn't land
Mhm.
anywhere, right? There's nowhere
Mhm.
to direct it. There's no person, there's no man or woman that you can actually direct it at. It just goes.
Mhm.
And so the feeling that by sending it back and telling them to fuck off, that it's actually going to do anything. This is the thing. This is why people don't do it. I think because they
Mhm.
don't actually feel like it's going to land anywhere.
Mhm. And this, with every passing day, that distance between the consumer and the individual or the whatever that's responsible is increasing.
Yeah.
And like and there's a sense of powerlessness that goes with that, and it's all tied in together. And this is the longer we leave it, the more difficult it's going to get.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That kind of,
And
and I think more,
we are entrained from a very, very, very early age to be fearful of and to obey authority figures. And so when we're, you know, and authority becomes all of that, like, you know, authority is also the corporations that we deal with. We perceive them as authorities. Of course, they're not, but we perceive them as authorities. And so the reluctance to challenge them, it's all programmed into us very, very, very early on. And so we just sit here meekly and accept what we're given.
that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
given less and less and
And we're
less
given
and
less and
less.
less. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And where do, like, you know, what is the end game? Where does it, like,
So how do we go about doing that then? Like what does that actually look like? The not just you doing it, not just you taking this box of fish back and saying, I refuse to pay for this, send it back, I don't want it, right? And like, not just you doing it, but how does that get seeded more broadly? Like, how do people get inspired more broadly to do that? Because obviously the more people do it, the more effect that it has. The more people see people doing it, the more they will be inspired to do it themselves, and so on and so on, right? Like you can see it snowballing quite quickly, but how do you get that initial momentum?
the first thing that comes to mind is these ridiculous Facebook challenges. To actually have something like that that had some kind of purpose or positivity behind it instead of these ridiculous, you know, just kind of.
I don't go on Facebook. You're going to need to explain
I
to me what
don't either.
Facebook
I don't.
challenges.
I'm off. I'm off. Like, yeah, those challenges were enough for me. It's just kind of
Oh,
like,
so is this like the cold water thing, right? Like stand there and have some.
all these,
Okay, yeah, okay, yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of stuff. It's kind of, um, but and this is the other thing. Like, the algorithms have made it more difficult for things to go viral unless it's the things they want to go viral, and they're usually fucking nonsense, time wasting.
Distractions.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but but they also, like, that kind of collective stupidity adds to that sense of powerlessness, that, like, how could we possibly be coherent when that's what fucking goes viral?
Mm.
And that gives us this sense that that's humanity. That's what humanity's like. Just give up. There's no hope. You know, but I think this is part of the last referendum here. It's kind of like the whole mainstream media, all the political parties, all were saying essentially, if you don't vote yes, it's because you're far right.
Mm. Yeah.
And the whole country just went, you know. So that that our perception of the collective, I think there's a threshold there too where we realize what we think is humanity isn't actually what, that's what we're being led to believe, and we're being led astray rather than into a better world or into a solution to the various things that, you know, it's actually the crises are deepening and getting worse, um because we are being led astray, we're not
Yeah,
being led.
because we're essentially ignoring them. We're being told that they're being addressed, but actually
We're not.
we're ignoring them. Yeah. There's one other
Mm,
thing I want to throw in here, which is not a new for anyone that's been watching my channel over the years. It's not a new idea, but I mean the other that you know, in addition to the sending back the fish kind of thing, I feel this has to operate on a political level also. Like we have to be able to say to our sorry, but these range of options that you're offering us are not acceptable. Like you're essentially all on the same basic team. There's nothing radical. There's nothing new here. And so like we are governed by
mm,
consent. And in order to give your consent, in order to say yes to something, no has to be an option, right? And we
mm,
have no mechanism in the UK or in Ireland for that matter for saying no. None of these options are acceptable. More options, please. And
mm,
so none of the above on the ballot paper. I don't think democracy can be called democracy without a no option on the ballot paper, that none of this is accepted. And if enough of the electorate feel that none of this is acceptable, then new options must be offered, right? You don't get the lesser of evils, you get something actually acceptable.
So that packaging, right? Transparency. So you get to see what's in the box. For me, my radical idea is to eliminate secret ballots.
So everyone's vote is.
So we know who everybody votes.
Who voted for who?
Yeah. And those politicians who are returned to power, we get to know, because there are those among us who are subjecting us to this shit, and we need to know who they are. So I think taking away the secret ballot, because it's not like we have any coercion, like that's why it was a secret ballot, so that people were free of coercion in their vote. If we take that away and we get to see who's voting for who, like the Leo Varadkar, the prime minister who just resigned, Uberboyo talks about this in his video. This guy has been in the upper echelons of political life in this country. He was finance minister, then he became Taoiseach, 2 terms. Then he went into coalition with the main opposition party, to keep the party that everybody had voted for out of government. And then they split the prime minister between them. So the head of the Fianna Fáil party was Taoiseach for 2 years, and then the head of the Fine Gael party for 2 years. So he's just, but the way Irish represents, it's not representative democracy, it's proportional. Malta do it as well. So you vote for your main candidate, and then you vote number 2,
yeah,
3.
ranked choice voting. Yeah.
So he got in on the 8th count. So like he barely scraped to get his seat again, and then got to be Taoiseach for 2 years, leading up to this disastrous referendum.
So, sorry, just to be clear, when you're talking about removing secret ballots, you're talking about for MPs voting within the House.
No,
You're
I'm
talking about for all
strategy
people in general elections and referendums.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stand behind your like transparency. This is it.
Yeah, I just see the potential. I understand what you're saying. I see the potential for witch hunts and so on coming about from that, though. So I don't know. And it doesn't solve the primary problem of not having anything that you actually want to vote for on the ballot paper. It doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't solve the problem of consent doesn't exist without being able to say no to the options available. You're not actually consenting. If you're forced to pick one of these options, right, you're not actually consenting to any of them. You're being coerced.
I think I've thought about it quite a bit, man, and what we do about it. There aren't that many solutions. Like, how do we do that? Do we create new political parties? Do we feel adequate to do that? Like, for me at this stage,
that's one pathway.
You know, and like for me, the only option politically is actually to become political and get involved in politics myself. But that means that everything else I'm doing has to go by the wayside, because that's where all my time is going to be spent. And is that really what I want? Like, who wants to do that? You know, that kind of way. But I do think there are certain behaviors we should be ashamed of, and that's why we like to hide them. And I think people should be ashamed of themselves for voting for particular individuals, and to be held accountable for what they are empowering through their vote. I don't think that there's any problem with that. And if we can antidote or disempower any the whole concept of the witch hunt and that kind of thing. That's not that's kind of ridiculous. That's you just make that low frequency, stupid, tribal. Like you shame that too.
Mm.
Like there's this thing that shame reminds us of our best selves, and that to have that, be transparent, be that open. Um,
I mean, shame
like,
can be a very, very powerful reminder of our best selves. I agree with that. It's also something that can be weaponized and used pretty
oh
ugly.
man,
So,
I'm Irish. Like we went to Catholic church, yeah.
yeah.
I know well.
So yeah,
Um,
it's something that needs to be handled with great care, shame, because
yeah,
it is so
yeah,
powerful, right? It needs to be handled very carefully if you're using it in order to moderate behavior.
yeah. But all
Yeah,
this,
this is maybe a discussion for another time because I think it's an interesting one.
okay,
But yeah, my immediate reaction is I don't love the use. I don't love the harnessing of shame in order to make people behave differently. Anyway, whatever. It's a discussion for another time. It's certainly an interesting one.
oh, for
Yeah,
sure.
the anonymizing of voting would
Mm.
really, I feel
It
it
is
might be
interesting though,
gangs
isn't it?
hanging out at polling stations. You know what I mean? Like, who did you vote for, and beating them up on the way out. You know, I can see this kind of thing happening. Um,
There's a really interesting kind of the transparency thing. I see what you're saying, but to have like if you take like if we were to go to if we can do our banking online and stuff like that, then we can vote with our phones. And Google knows everything anyway. So the notion that we have any privacy is kind of um, then you have there's cameras outside all the polling stations. Nobody
mm,
gets away with this shit. There's it's kind of like the totalitarian state that watches everybody and what they're doing all the time for profit, which is what we have, um, versus repurposing all of that technology that's already in place to facilitate and to support transparency
broad
across the board,
transparency.
broad
Mm.
transparency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of transparency in general. I mean, I really am. I really am. It's very interesting. Yeah, for this is definitely something to be pursued more. This is very interesting.
Mm.
All right, so we've been talking almost an hour, Mike, believe it or not. So
Okay.
yeah, I think it's time to start
You
thinking
just
about winding this up. Um,
yeah.
so yeah, is there anything you want? Any closing thoughts that you want to share? I just want to say I really like the link of the fish in the box to the more broad thing of expectations created with packaging, be it
Mhm.
politics, be it whatever and then the less
Yeah, and
less actually being found inside that pretty packaging, right? The packaging getting prettier and prettier, and we're finding less and less actually of real substance
mm,
inside that packaging. I like that metaphor.
mm. And I really like the notion of no, fuck that. I'm sending it back as the response to when you open the package and you realize it's not the thing that you were sold.
Mm,
And to just not accept that instead of just eating the shitty little piece of fish.
and never buying it again.
Yeah, because that's not actually taking. Ne- that's
Yeah, it's a passive response as opposed to an active response.
and it's an individual response.
Yeah.
There needs to be like that kind of for me coming out of this. That's my response. Is needs more thought than it's been getting so far, instead of just allowing it to just bug me,
Yeah.
and keeping that, yeah, just kind of
Perfect.
actually do
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
and
Perfect.
find some way to be productive about the response.
That's something I'm going to take from this conversation as well. And if only you and I in our lives, when it happens to us or when it happens to people around us and we see it, we can encourage them. Hey, don't just accept that fucking. Send that shit
Exactly.
back, right? No. Tell them that is unacceptable. Don't pay that bill, whatever it is, right? Like, make your stand. Don't pay that bill. I'm not going to throw you in jail for it. You know, if you simply not paying a bill, that initiates a process of first notice, second notice, third notice, debt, right? Like that triggers that process. But if you correspond with them, that process doesn't come into effect. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
And yeah, tell them they should be ashamed of themselves.
exactly. You should be ashamed of yourselves offering.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a good use. That's a good use for harnessing shame. Absolutely. All right, Mike.
Okay, man.
Nice one. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming on. This was most interesting, and I really would like to follow up on this discussion about transparency around transparency in general, but the voting
Mhm.
thing in particular. I'd like to unpick that more at a future date. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on. And anything else occurs to you, you're more than welcome to come on and do another one.
I'll have a think about it.
All
All
right.
right, man. Thank